It was a quiet Tuesday morning in the small town of Elkridge, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and nothing exciting ever really happened. The roads were empty except for the occasional truck rolling past and the soft hum of a jukebox playing inside. A little roadside diner called Maya's place. Maya, a middle-aged black woman with a heart as big as her smile, owned the diner. She'd built it from the ground up after years of hard work, serving coffee and kindness to truckers, travelers, and townsfolk alike. That morning, just as the sun was coming up, Maya noticed something strange outside her window. A man in a torn leather jacket running down the road, chased by flashing red and blue lights. His jacket bore the unmistakable symbol of the Hells Angels, the notorious biker club that most people avoided even mentioning. He was bruised, panting, and scared, but there was something desperate in his eyes that caught Maya off guard. Without a second thought, she unlocked her door and motioned for him to get inside. Within seconds, the sound of police sirens filled the air. 2 officers burst into the diner, asking if she'd seen a man on the run. Maya's heart pounded, but she calmly wiped her hands on her apron and shook her head. "Ain't seen nobody, officer, just me and my coffee," she said, her voice steady though her palms were trembling. The police looked around, suspicious, but unsure, then drove off to continue their search. When the coast was clear, the biker, whose name was Reed, stepped out from behind the counter where he'd been hiding. He looked rough, like a man who'd seen too much of the world, but there was a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. He told her he hadn't done what they thought, that he was being hunted because he'd tried to stop something wrong inside his own club. Maya didn't know if it was true or not, but something in his voice made her believe him. She gave him food, coffee, and a place to rest in her small storage room until morning. The next day, Maya thought the whole thing was over, just another strange story to tuck away. But when she opened the diner at sunrise, the ground began to rumble. The sound of engines grew louder and louder until she stepped outside and saw it. Hundreds of motorcycles lined up down the road. Chrome glinted in the sunlight, leather jackets gleamed, and the red and white Hells Angels insignia filled the horizon. At least 300 bikers had come roaring into town, not for trouble, but for her. What happened next would shock the whole town and change Maya's life forever. The morning had started like any other for Maya. She arrived at her diner before dawn, unlocking the front door as the first light of day stretched across the horizon. The coffee machine hissed to life, the smell of roasted beans filling the small space. She loved these quiet hours before the customers arrived. Before the chatter began, just her thoughts, and the hum of the jukebox softly playing an old blues tune. For years, Maya's place had been a safe haven for travelers, truckers, and locals who sought warmth and kindness. It wasn't much, just a cozy roadside stop with 6 booths and a cracked neon sign, but it was hers, built from hard work and long nights. Yet that morning something felt different. There was a stillness in the air, a tension she couldn't quite name, as if the world was holding its breath. Just as she was refilling the sugar jars, the sound of engines cut through the calm. At first she thought it was just another truck passing through, but then came the screech of tires, followed by shouting and the unmistakable wail of sirens. Her brow furrowed as she stepped to the window, wiping her hands on her apron. Down the highway, a lone figure stumbled into view, a man disheveled, limping, his clothes torn and stained with dirt. Behind him, flashing lights approached fast. The man glanced over his shoulder, panic etched across his face, and for a brief moment, his eyes met Maya's through the glass. There was fear in his eyes, yes, but also something else. Exhaustion, desperation, a plea for help that went beyond words. Then she saw the emblem on his back, a skull with wings, and the words, Hells Angels. Maya's heart sank. Everyone in town knew the reputation that name carried. The biker gangs were feared, often portrayed as violent, lawless, and dangerous. But in that fleeting second, she didn't see a criminal. She saw a man running for his life. Without stopping to think, Maya unlocked the diner door and whispered sharply, "Get in here, quick." The man hesitated only for a moment before ducking inside, collapsing near the counter. His breathing was ragged, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice hoarse. Maya didn't answer. She just pulled down the blinds, her heart racing, and pointed toward the back. "There's a storage room behind the kitchen," she said quietly. "Hide there, and don't make a sound." He nodded, clutching his side, and staggered toward the small room as the sirens drew closer. Within seconds, 2 police cruisers pulled up outside, lights flashing red and blue across the diner's windows. Maya steadied herself, trying to slow her breathing. She had never lied to the police before, never had a reason to. The door swung open, and 2 officers stepped in, hands resting on their holsters. "Morning, ma'am," one said curtly. "We're looking for a suspect. White male, leather jacket, tattoos, part of the Hells Angels. You've seen him come this way?" Maya swallowed hard. She could feel the sweat forming on her palms, could almost hear the man's breathing from the back room. "Can't say I have, officer," she replied evenly, forcing a calm smile. "Just me, my coffee, and the sound of my old jukebox. You sure he's around here?" The officer eyed her for a long moment, his gaze sharp, searching. He walked a slow circle around the diner, peering behind the counter and out through the back window. Maya stood perfectly still, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles turned white. Finally, the second officer shook his head. Let's move on. Maybe he cut through the woods. They left as abruptly as they came, the door closing behind them with a soft jingle of the bell. Maya stayed frozen for several seconds after the sirens faded into the distance, her breath shallow. Then she exhaled shakily and locked the door again. From the back room came a faint sound of movement. She turned and walked slowly toward it. When she opened the door, the biker was sitting on an old crate, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to clean the blood from his face with a rag. Up close, he looked younger than she expected, maybe mid-30s, with weathered skin and tired eyes. His jacket bore the scuffed patches of his club, the leather cracked and stained with road dust. You didn't have to do that, he said softly. You could have gotten in trouble for me? Maya crossed her arms and studied him for a moment before answer. Maybe, but I couldn't just watch someone get hunted down without knowing the truth. What's your name? Reed, he replied, lowering his gaze. And thank you, Miss Maya, she said simply. Now tell me, Reed, what did you do to have the police chasing you like that? He hesitated, then let out a long sigh. It's not what they think. I didn't hurt anyone. There's been things going wrong in my club. Some of the boys have been dealing stuff they shouldn't, getting into things that could ruin everything. I tried to stop it, but one of them turned on me. Said I ratted to the cops. Next thing I know, the police are after me for something I didn't do. Maya listened quietly, her expression unreadable. She'd seen enough in her life to know when someone was lying. But something in Reed's tone, that rough edge of sincerity, the weary guilt in his eyes made her believe him. She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it over. You can stay here until morning, she said. Then you need to move on before they come back. Reed nodded, clutching the warm mug with both hands like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. The night stretched on in silence. Maya checked on him a few times, bringing him food, bandages, and a blanket. He thanked her each time with quiet humility. Outside, the rain began to fall, tapping against the roof like a restless heartbeat. In the distance, the faint echo of motorcycles could be heard, a reminder that danger still lingered beyond those diner walls. But for now, inside that small space, there was only the soft glow of the neon light, the smell of coffee, and the unspoken bond between two strangers, one who had risked everything to show kindness, and another who had been given a second chance at trust. When dawn finally broke, Maya peeked through the blinds. The world looked peaceful again, as if the chaos of the night had been washed away. Reed was already awake, his jacket slung over his shoulder. I'll be gone before anyone sees me, he said. But I won't forget this, Maya. You did more for me than most people ever would. She didn't say much, just nodded, her usual calm masking the unease she still felt. As he walked out into the pale light, disappearing down the long stretch of highway, she thought it was over. She thought she'd never see him again. But she didn't yet know that this small act of courage, this quiet defiance, had already set something far greater in motion, something that would shake her peaceful little town to its very core. The next morning dawned calm and golden, sunlight spilling through the blinds of Maya's diner as she flipped the sign from closed to open. The events of the previous night still lingered in her mind like a half-remembered dream. She kept glancing toward the window, half expecting flashing lights or the sound of sirens. But the highway outside was quiet, just the soft hum of engines in the distance and the chirping of morning birds. Maya moved through her routine with a strange heaviness in her chest, wiping tables, setting out plates, and pouring the first pot of coffee. She told herself it was over. The man was gone, the police had moved on, and life would return to normal. But deep down, she felt a restlessness she couldn't shake. Like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. Around 8, the first customers began to trickle in. Old Tom from the gas station, a couple of truckers passing through, and 2 local women gossiping about how the cops had been tearing down the highway all night. Heard they were after some biker, one of them said between sips of coffee. A Hell's Angel, can you imagine? In this town. Maya kept her face neutral, pretending not to listen. Probably troublemakers, the other replied. You let one of them in your place, and next thing you know, you'll have a gang war in your parking lot. The women laughed, unaware that Maya's heart had just skipped a beat. She smiled politely, served their pancakes, and busied herself behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped down a clean glass for the 3rd time. Just before noon, as the sun climbed high and the air shimmered with heat, Maya noticed something strange, a low rumble that began faint and distant, like thunder rolling across the plains. At first, she thought it was a convoy of trucks, but as the sound grew louder, deeper, she realized it was something else entirely. The ground began to tremble beneath her feet. The chatter in the diner quieted as everyone turned toward the windows. Out on the horizon, a dark wave was moving down the road, glinting in the sunlight like metal and chrome. The rumble grew until it filled the air, a symphony of roaring engines that made the dishes on the shelves rattle. Maya's heart pounded as she stepped outside, shielding her eyes from the glare. What she saw made her breath catch. One after another, motorcycles streamed into town. Not 10, not 50, but hundreds. The line seemed endless, a flood of black leather, gleaming pipes, and roaring engines that filled the entire highway. The lead riders slowed as they approached the diner, their jackets emblazoned with the unmistakable Hells Angels emblem. Within minutes, the diner's parking lot and the road beside it were packed with bikes, nearly 300 of them, stretching as far as the eye could see. The townspeople stood frozen, some peeking out from behind doors and windows, others backing away in fear. Maya stood on the diner's steps, her apron fluttering in the wind from the engines. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the riders began to remove their helmets. Men and women of all ages, scarred, tattooed, weathered, their expressions serious but not hostile. From the middle of the crowd, a tall man stepped forward. His beard was streaked with gray, and his presence alone carried authority. His jacket bore the title President. He stopped a few feet from Maya and looked her in the eye. "You, Maya?" he asked in a gravelly voice. She nodded slowly, uncertain. "I am." He reached into his pocket, and for a heartbeat, she tensed. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a small folded piece of paper, a note. "This came from Reed," he said, handing it to her. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded it. In rough handwriting, it read, "She saved me when no one else would. Treat her like one of ours." Maya looked up, speechless. The man nodded. "He told us what you did," he said. "You didn't have to help him. Most folks would have called the cops, locked the door, or turned their backs. But you didn't. You showed him respect when the world turned its back. We don't forget things like that." The crowd of bikers behind him murmured in agreement. Maya's throat tightened, her heart thudding so loud she could hear it over the silence that followed. She'd acted on instinct, not for reward or recognition. But now here she was, standing before hundreds of people who had come because of that single moment of compassion. One of the bikers, a woman with long braids and a patch that read Road Captain, stepped forward and placed something on the diner's steps, a bouquet of wildflowers, tied together with a strip of red leather. "For you," she said quietly, "from the Brotherhood." The sight was surreal. These were people the town feared, people who were seen as outlaws, misfits, rebels, yet they stood there, not with anger or arrogance, but with quiet gratitude. Maya felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Some of the bikers began parking their bikes neatly, forming a protective circle around the diner. Others dismounted and started walking toward the entrance, not aggressively but respectfully, nodding to her as they passed. A few asked for coffee, some for breakfast, others just wanted to shake her hand. Within minutes, her little diner, which usually held a dozen locals, was filled wall to wall with leather jackets and laughter. Outside, the townsfolk gathered nervously, watching from a distance. The sheriff arrived, his car pulling up cautiously at the edge of the crowd. He stepped out, resting a hand on his belt, ready for confrontation. "What's going on here, Maya?" he called out, his tone wary. Before Maya could answer, the biker president turned toward him, calm but firm. "No trouble here, Sheriff," he said. "We just came to thank a lady who showed more decency than most people wearing badges." The sheriff frowned, unsure how to respond. He scanned the group 300 bikers, all watching him silently, then finally nodded stiffly. "As long as everyone behaves," he muttered. Getting back into his car and driving away, Maya exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. As the afternoon went on, the tension began to melt. The bikers helped clean tables, paid double for their meals, and even tipped her staff generously. One of them repaired the flickering neon sign outside. Another offered to repaint the diner's fence. The road outside turned into an ocean of chrome and laughter as the Hells Angels shared stories, their voices rising above the hum of idling engines. For the first time, Maya saw them not as the world did, not as headlines or stereotypes, but as people by sunset. The orange glow bathed the diner in soft light. Maya stood by the door, watching as the last of the bikers lined up their motorcycles. The president approached her once more and extended his hand. "You've got friends now, Maya," he said simply. "If anyone ever gives you trouble, you call us. Doesn't matter where you are." She shook his hand, still stunned by the surrealness of the day. The engines roared to life again, one by one, filling the air with a deafening symphony. As they rode off into the distance, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the faint smell of gasoline, Maya stood silently in front of her diner, the note from Reed still in her hand, her heart heavy with awe and disbelief at how one simple act of kindness had brought an army of loyalty to her doorstep. As evening settled over the town, the roar of the motorcycles faded into the distance, leaving behind the scent of fuel and the echo of laughter. Maya stood at the doorway of her diner, watching the last streaks of sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and violet. The day had felt like something out of a dream, and now that it was over, the quiet almost seemed unnatural. The street was still, yet there was an undeniable shift in the air. People who had spent years avoiding her diner, out of old habits or prejudice, now whispered about her with new curiosity. Some admired her courage. Others thought she had made a dangerous mistake. But for Maya, it wasn't about sides or judgment. She had done what she believed was right, and somehow, that act had made her small corner of the world impossible to ignore. As night crept in, a police cruiser pulled up outside, its headlights casting long shadows across the gravel. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, his hat tilted low, his expression unreadable. He walked up to the diner, his boots crunching against the ground. Maya stood her ground, her apron still on, her hands folded calmly. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She nodded and let him inside. The diner was spotless, cleaned, and rearranged by the bikers themselves before they left. The smell of coffee still lingered. Daniels glanced around, his jaw tight. "You realize what you've done, Maya? You sheltered a wanted man. You lied to law enforcement. And today, you invited 300 of his brothers into this town." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't invite anyone, Sheriff. They came on their own. And I didn't lie. I protected someone who didn't deserve to be hunted like an animal." The sheriff sighed, removing his hat and setting it on the counter. "You don't know these people. They're not heroes, they're outlaws. You got lucky today. That's all. If they'd wanted to, they could have burned this place to the ground." Maya poured him a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "And yet," she said softly, "they didn't. They paid their bills, cleaned my floors, and thanked me for kindness. Maybe the world isn't as simple as you think it is." Daniels took a slow sip, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. Just then, the diner door opened again, and a young man stepped in hesitantly. He wore jeans and a denim jacket, not a biker but not quite a local either. In his hands, he carried a folded envelope. "You, Maya?" he asked nervously. She nodded. "This is from Reed," he said, placing it on the counter. "He told me to bring it here if he didn't make it back." The sheriff stiffened. "Didn't make it back." The young man's voice dropped. "There was a fight. Not here. Out near the state line. Some of his own turned on him after what happened. He wanted you to have this." Then, without another word, he turned and left. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, rough and smudged with grease. "Maya, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I just want you to know that you did something no one else ever did for me. You saw me as a person, not a patch. You gave me shelter when the world wanted me gone. Don't let them tell you it didn't matter. You made a difference. Tell the truth, even when it costs you. That's the only thing worth standing for, Reed." Maya's eyes blurred with tears as she folded the letter and placed it carefully under the counter. Word of the letter spread quickly through town. Some people felt sympathy. Others rolled their eyes, calling her a fool for trusting a biker. The local news even showed up, filming interviews and painting the scene as a bizarre act of rebellion. But the bikers hadn't forgotten. Over the next few days, small groups of them returned quietly. Not 300 this time, just a handful at a time. They brought flowers, helped repair the fence, even repainted the diner's old sign for free. The same townsfolk who once whispered in fear now watched with uncertainty, unsure whether to feel threatened or inspired. One afternoon, while Maya was refilling the coffee pots, a group of officers arrived again, this time with papers and stern expressions. They wanted to question her officially, accusing her of obstruction and aiding a fugitive. The mood grew tense. Before Maya could answer, the sound of engines roared once more. A dozen bikers pulled up in formation, dismounting in silence. The leader, the same gray-bearded man from before, stepped forward, his eyes cold and steady. "You're not taking her anywhere," he said firmly. "She did what was right. If you want to talk about justice, maybe start by asking why your system hunted an innocent man." The standoff drew a crowd. Locals gathered at the edge of the street, whispering, waiting to see what would happen. Maya stood between them, one hand raised toward the bikers, the other toward the police. "Enough," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "No one's fighting here. Not in front of my diner." The sheriff stared at her for a long moment, then lowered his voice. "You really think this ends well, Maya?" She gave a faint smile. "It already did. You just can't see it yet." Slowly, the officers backed off. The bikers too eased their stance, their hands dropping from their belts. The moment passed like a held breath finally released. After that day, things began to change. The police stopped circling her diner so often. The locals, once wary, started stopping by again, some out of curiosity, others out of respect. The Hells Angels came by less frequently, but when they did, they came peacefully. Sometimes just to share stories over coffee or to leave fresh flowers by the window. Maya never asked for protection, but she knew, deep down, she had it, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Weeks later, on a Sunday morning, a convoy of motorcycles appeared once more, smaller than before, but solemn. They parked quietly and entered the diner, each placing something on the counter, a patch, a coin, a ring, little tokens of remembrance. The president stepped forward again, his voice rough with emotion. "We laid Red to rest," he said. "He wanted to be remembered here, the place where someone believed in him one last time." Maya nodded, tears in her eyes, and placed his letter in a small glass frame by the counter, next to a photo of him that one of the bikers had brought. Over time, the story of Maya's diner spread far beyond the town. Travelers began stopping just to see the place where a black woman once stood up for a man everyone else had written off. The walls of her diner filled with photos, bikers, truckers, families, even a few cops, all united by the simple truth that one act of kindness could ripple farther than anyone could imagine. What had started as a moment of risk had become something bigger, something lasting. People came not just for the food, but for the story, for the reminder that courage and compassion could bridge even the widest divides. And though Reed was gone, his presence lingered. The soft rumble of distant engines on the highway would sometimes make Maya look up from her counter and smile faintly, knowing that somewhere out there, the Brotherhood still rode, and that her little diner, once an ordinary roadside stop, had become a symbol of something the world often forgot, that decency, even in the smallest acts, could change the course of countless lives.